Rosalie Garrett clutched her handkerchief against her pale lips as the stagecoach bounced violently over another rut in the road, sending waves of dizziness crashing through her already fragile body. The late afternoon sun of July 1878 beat mercilessly against the window, turning the coach into an oven that only worsened her condition. She had been fighting this fever for 3 days now, ever since the stagecoach had left Santa Fe, but she refused to let it derail her journey to meet the man who would become her husband. "Not much farther to Clifton, miss," the driver called down from his perch. "Just over that ridge there, and you'll be seeing Arizona's finest little mining town." Rosalie nodded weakly, though the driver couldn't see her. Clifton, Arizona Territory. The name had become both a prayer and a promise during her long journey from Boston. She pressed her forehead against the glass window, seeking relief from its relative coolness. The landscape that greeted her was nothing like the lush greenery of Massachusetts, all rust-colored earth and rugged mountains that seemed to stretch endlessly under the vast blue sky. Beautiful, yes, but so foreign to her eyes. The letter from Lucas Shaw was tucked safely in her reticule. She had read it so many times over the past months that she had memorized every word. A successful cattle rancher seeking a bride who wouldn't mind the hardships of Western life. He had written with honesty about the challenges, but also the opportunities of building a life together in this wild country. A partner, he had called her in his letters, not a servant or merely a wife, but a true partner. It was that word that had convinced Rosalie, 23 years old and facing spinsterhood in a city where eligible men were scarce after the war, to accept his proposal. Another violent coughing spell racked her body, and Rosalie noticed with alarm the specks of blood on her handkerchief. The fever was worsening. The thought of meeting Lucas Shaw in this condition filled her with dread. What man would want a bride who arrived at death's door? The stagecoach lurched to a halt, and Rosalie peered out the window at the dusty main street of Clifton. It was smaller than she had imagined, a handful of wooden buildings lining both sides of the street, with the imposing brick structure of the Copper Mountain Mining Company standing proudly at one end. Several horses were hitched outside what appeared to be a saloon, and a few people milled about, going about their business. "Here we are, miss. Clifton, Arizona Territory," the driver announced, climbing down to open the door for her. Rosalie gathered her strength, tucking the soiled handkerchief into her sleeve. She refused to show weakness now, not when she was so close. She accepted the driver's hand and stepped down, immediately feeling the world tilt precariously around her. The heat hit her like a physical force, sucking what little energy she had left. "Miss Garrett." A deep voice cut through the haze of her fever. She turned toward the sound, trying to focus her vision. A tall man with broad shoulders and a weathered face stood before her, his hat in his hands. The sun behind him cast his features in shadow, but she could make out kind eyes that widened with concern as they took in her appearance. "Mr. Shaw," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, madam, Lucas Shaw." He stepped forward, frowning now. "Are you all right, Miss Garrett?" Rosalie opened her mouth to assure him that she was perfectly fine, that it was merely the journey that had tired her, but the words wouldn't come. The world tilted again, darkness creeping in from the edges of her vision. Her knees buckled beneath her. The last thing Rosalie remembered was strong arms catching her before she hit the ground, and a deep voice calling her name with unexpected tenderness. Lucas Shaw had been waiting at the stagecoach station since noon, though the coach wasn't due until 4. Nervousness had driven him there early, and now as he carried the unconscious woman toward his wagon, he cursed himself for not bringing Doc Peterson with him. The woman in his arms was burning with fever, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "Shaw." "That the mail-order bride you've been waiting on," called Frank Miller from the doorway of his general store. "Yes, and she's sick," Lucas replied tersely, not breaking his stride. "Send Doc Peterson out to my ranch soon as you can." He laid Rosalie gently in the back of his wagon, using his rolled-up coat as a pillow beneath her head. Her face was alarmingly pale except for 2 bright spots of color high on her cheeks, a sure sign of dangerous fever. He covered her with a light blanket, then quickly retrieved her trunk from the stagecoach and secured it to the wagon. "How long has she been like this?" Lucas asked the stagecoach driver. The man shrugged, already turning back to his horses. "Started coughing bad about 3 days back after we left Santa Fe. Kept to herself mostly, didn't complain none." Lucas's jaw tightened. 3 days with a fever bouncing around in that stagecoach. It was a wonder she was still breathing. He climbed onto the wagon seat and took up the reins, urging his horses into a trot. The 15 miles to his ranch had never seemed so far. As he drove, Lucas found himself studying the woman whenever the road allowed. She was smaller than he'd expected, though it was hard to tell much with her lying down and bundled in the blanket. Her hair was a rich chestnut brown, escaping from what had likely been a neat arrangement before her collapse. Her face, despite the pallor of illness, showed delicate features, high cheekbones, a straight nose, and lips that might have been full if not pressed thin with pain. He hadn't known what to expect, really. Their correspondence had been proper and somewhat reserved. He knew she was 23, educated, and had worked as a schoolteacher in Boston. She was an orphan with no family ties holding her to the East. But letters couldn't convey a person's essence, and Lucas had prepared himself for any number of disappointments. What he hadn't prepared for was meeting a woman already in the grip of what might be a fatal illness. By the time they reached his ranch, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. Lucas's foreman, Eduardo Vasquez, came running when he heard the wagon. "Senor Shaw." "Is this your bride?" The Mexican man's expression quickly shifted from excitement to concern when he saw the unconscious woman. "Yes, and she's very ill," Lucas said, jumping down from the wagon. "I've sent for the doctor. Help me get her inside." Between them, they carried Rosalie into the house and to the guest bedroom Lucas had prepared for her. It was the nicest room in the house aside from his own, with a large window overlooking the eastern pasture and mountains beyond. He had spent weeks getting it ready, new curtains ordered from Tucson, a colorful quilt purchased from a Navajo woman, wildflowers arranged in a vase on the dresser. Now he hardly noticed these touches as they laid her on the bed. "Maria." Lucas called, and moments later, Eduardo's wife appeared in the doorway. "She's burning with fever. We need cool water and cloths." Maria nodded, her dark eyes assessing the situation quickly. "I will bring tea also, and soup if she wakes." "Thank you," Lucas said, already unbuttoning the high collar of Rosalie's traveling dress to help her breathe easier. It felt wrong to be undressing a woman he had just met, especially one who would be his wife, but propriety had to give way to necessity. With Maria's help, they removed Rosalie's outer garments, leaving her in her chemise and petticoat. Lucas turned away while Maria loosened her corset, hearing the woman's breathing ease immediately when the restrictive garment was removed. "You have done this before, senor?" Maria asked, placing a cool cloth on Rosalie's forehead. Lucas nodded, taking a seat in the chair beside the bed. "My mother before she passed, and ranch hands who have taken ill over the years." Maria squeezed his shoulder sympathetically. "I will bring more water and prepare medicines." "The doctor, he will come soon." "I hope so," Lucas replied, his eyes never leaving Rosalie's face. "I surely hope so." But Doc Peterson didn't arrive that night. A messenger came instead, explaining that the doctor had been called to a mining accident in Mornsey and wouldn't return until morning. Lucas sent the boy back with instructions to bring the doctor the moment he returned, regardless of the hour. Through the night, Lucas maintained his vigil. He bathed Rosalie's face and arms with cool water, changed the cloth on her forehead when it grew warm, and trickled small amounts of water between her parched lips. Occasionally, she would stir, muttering words he couldn't understand, her head turning restlessly on the pillow. During one such moment of semi-consciousness, her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and bright with fever. "Mother," she whispered, reaching out a trembling hand. Lucas took it gently between his own. "No, Miss Garrett, it's Lucas Shaw. You're at my ranch near Clifton." Confusion clouded her features, then slowly recognition dawned. "The stagecoach, I arrived." Her voice was barely audible. Yes, you did. You're ill, but I'm taking care of you. The doctor will come in the morning. She seemed to process this information slowly, her eyelids drooping with exhaustion. I'm sorry, she whispered, not how I wanted to meet you. Don't worry about that now, Lucas assured her, squeezing her hand lightly. Just rest and get well. A ghost of a smile touched her lips before she drifted back into unconsciousness. Lucas continued to hold her hand, studying the delicate fingers that now lay limp in his palm. He thought about the courage it must have taken for this woman to travel across the country to marry a man she had never met, and then to endure days of illness without complaint. There was strength in her, beneath that fragile exterior. As the night deepened, Lucas found himself talking to her, though he knew she couldn't hear him. He told her about the ranch, about the cattle operation he had built from nothing over the past decade. He described the mountains that surrounded them and how they changed colors with the seasons. He spoke of his plans for expanding the herd and building a larger house someday. You'll like it here, I think, he said softly. It's not Boston, but it has its own beauty. The air is clean, and the stars, you've never seen stars like these, I'd wager. At some point, exhaustion overcame him, and Lucas dozed in the chair, his hand still holding Rosalie's. He woke with a start when he heard her coughing harsh, painful sounds that shook her entire frame. He quickly helped her sit up, supporting her with an arm around her shoulders until the spasm passed. When she lay back, there was blood on her lips. Fear clutched at Lucas's heart. He had seen this before in his mother, who had died of consumption when he was 14. The same pallor, the same blood-flecked cough. He had been helpless then, watching her fade away despite all his father's efforts. The memory of that helplessness surged through him now, followed by a fierce determination. No, he muttered, not again. He redoubled his efforts, bathing her with cool water when the fever spiked, propping her up with pillows to ease her breathing, spooning broth between her lips whenever she seemed conscious enough to swallow. Maria brought herbal teas and poultices, traditional remedies from her childhood in Mexico. Lucas tried them all, desperate for any sign of improvement. Dawn broke, painting the room with pale golden light. Rosalie's condition had neither improved nor worsened, which Lucas chose to interpret as a positive sign. He was changing the cloth on her forehead when he heard hoofbeats approaching. Minutes later, Dr. Peterson hurried into the room, medical bag in hand. The doctor was in his 60s, with a shock of white hair and perpetually worried blue eyes. Those eyes narrowed now as he took in Rosalie's appearance. How long has she been like this? He asked, immediately setting his bag on the bedside table. Since she arrived yesterday afternoon. She collapsed at the stagecoach station, Lucas explained, stepping back to give the doctor room. The driver said she'd been coughing for about 3 days before that. Peterson nodded, placing a stethoscope against Rosalie's chest. He listened intently, moving the instrument several times, then checked her pulse and peered into her eyes and throat. The examination was thorough, and Lucas found himself holding his breath as he waited for the verdict. Finally, the doctor straightened. Pneumonia, I believe, though there's a possibility of consumption. The fever is dangerously high and her lungs are quite congested. Will she? Lucas couldn't finish the question. Peterson's expression was grave but not without hope. She's young and appears to have been healthy before this illness. That's in her favor. The next 24 hours will be critical. If the fever breaks, she has a good chance. He opened his bag and removed several packets and bottles. This powder is to be mixed with water every 4 hours. It will help reduce the fever. These drops are for the cough, 5 drops under the tongue when she's awake enough to cooperate, and this tincture is for pain and to help her sleep. Lucas nodded, memorizing the instructions. What else can I do? Continue with the cool compresses for the fever. Keep her propped up to help with breathing, small amounts of broth and water whenever possible. The doctor hesitated. And prepare yourself, Shaw. Even with the best care, pneumonia can take a turn for the worse very quickly. Lucas's jaw tightened. She won't die. Peterson regarded him with sympathy. I'll come back this evening to check on her. Send for me immediately if her condition worsens. After the doctor left, Lucas resumed his place beside Rosalie's bed, administering the medicine as directed. The day passed in a haze of worry and exhaustion. Eduardo came to report on ranch business, but Lucas delegated everything to his foreman, unwilling to leave Rosalie's side for even a moment. As evening approached, her fever seemed to intensify. She tossed and turned, sometimes calling out in delirium. Lucas caught fragments pleas for her mother, questions about someone named Sarah, fearful mentions of fire. He held her hand through these episodes, speaking calmly, assuring her that she was safe. Dr. Peterson returned as promised and frowned at Rosalie's condition. "The fever is still too high," he said. "We need to try something more aggressive." What followed was the most difficult part of the ordeal. Following the doctor's instructions, Lucas and Maria wrapped Rosalie in sheets soaked in cool water, changing them frequently as they warmed against her fevered skin. Rosalie moaned in discomfort, sometimes struggling weakly against the treatment. It tore at Lucas's heart to cause her distress, but he persisted, knowing it might save her life. After the doctor departed again, Lucas continued the treatment through the night. By dawn, he was swaying on his feet with exhaustion, his eyes burning from lack of sleep. Maria insisted on taking over for a few hours, practically pushing him toward his own room. "Sleep, senor, I will watch her," the woman said firmly. "You will be no good to her if you collapse yourself." Reluctantly, Lucas agreed to rest, extracting a promise that Maria would wake him immediately if there was any change. He fell onto his bed fully clothed and was asleep almost instantly. He dreamed of Rosalie not as she was now, pale and fragile in the grip of illness, but as he imagined she might be in health. In his dream, she stood on the porch of his ranch house, her chestnut hair loose around her shoulders, laughing at something he had said. The sound of her laughter was like music, and in the dream, Lucas realized he had never heard it in reality. "Senor Shaw, senor," Maria's urgent voice pulled him from sleep. He bolted upright, heart pounding. "What is it? Is she worse?" Maria's face broke into a wide smile. "No, senor. The fever it has broken, come see." Lucas hurried to Rosalie's room, scarcely daring to hope, but when he entered, he could see the change immediately. The unnatural flush had left her cheeks, and though she was still pale, it was no longer the waxen pallor of critical illness. Her breathing, while not entirely clear, was deeper and more regular. As he approached the bed, her eyes fluttered open. For the first time since her arrival, they were clear and focused. "Mr. Shaw," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. Lucas felt an almost overwhelming surge of relief. "Miss Garrett, how are you feeling?" "Weak," she admitted, "and rather confused. How long have I been ill?" "2 days since you arrived," he told her, taking the chair beside her bed. "Though I understand you were unwell for several days on the journey." She nodded slightly, wincing as if the movement hurt. "I thought I could overcome it. I didn't want to delay my arrival." A look of distress crossed her face. "My letters, did they explain that I am prone to chest ailments? I should have been more explicit." "If you wish to cancel our arrangement, I would understand completely." Lucas stared at her in astonishment. After everything she had endured, her concern was whether he might reject her because of her illness. "Miss Garrett," he said firmly, "I have no intention of canceling anything. Unless, of course, you've changed your mind about marrying me now that you've seen me in person." A small smile touched her lips. "I haven't seen much of anything, Mr. Shaw, except this ceiling and occasionally your rather worried face looming over me." The hint of humor in her voice delighted him. "Well then, I suppose proper introductions are in order once you're feeling stronger." "Yes," she agreed, her eyelids already drooping with exhaustion. "I look forward to that." "Rest now," Lucas said softly. "We have plenty of time to get acquainted." As Rosalie drifted back to sleep, Lucas felt as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The doctor had been right, the breaking of the fever was a turning point. She would recover. Relief gave way to a strange feeling that took him a moment to identify: anticipation. For the first time since her arrival, he allowed himself to think about the future they might build together. The next few days marked a steady improvement in Rosalie's condition. Dr. Peterson pronounced her out of danger, though he cautioned that complete recovery would take time. The cough persisted, but without blood, and her strength gradually returned. By the 5th day, she was able to sit up in bed for extended periods, and Lucas brought her books from his modest library to help pass the time. On the 7th day after her arrival, Rosalie insisted on getting dressed and moving to the chair by the window. Lucas had objected initially, but her determined expression convinced him to relent. Maria helped her dress in a simple blue cotton gown, one of the few from her trunk that didn't require a corset, and Lucas carried her to the chair, alarmed at how little she weighed. "You need feeding up," he remarked as he settled her with a quilt across her lap. "So Maria tells me several times daily," Rosalie replied with a smile. "I believe she is personally offended by my lack of appetite. She takes pride in her cooking," Lucas said, pulling another chair close to hers. "Though I must admit, the entire household has been eating better since your arrival. Maria seems determined to impress you." Rosalie looked down at her hands, a slight flush coloring her pale cheeks. "Everyone has been so kind, I don't know how to thank you for the care you've shown me." "No thanks necessary," Lucas assured her. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said, looking up at him with surprising intensity. "Not anyone. I've been thinking about what might have happened if you had been a different sort of man. You didn't know me, had no obligation beyond our agreement. Many would have sent me to a boarding house or hospital, not taken me into their home and nursed me day and night." Lucas shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. "I'm no saint, Miss Garrett. I was worried is all." A smile touched her lips. "Mr. Shaw, I may have been delirious, but I remember moments your voice speaking to me through the darkness, your hand holding mine, cool cloths on my forehead. You saved my life." "Dr. Peterson did that," Lucas protested. "Dr. Peterson visited twice. You were there constantly." She reached out and placed her hand over his. "Thank you." The touch of her hand sent an unexpected warmth through him. Lucas found himself studying her face, the intelligence in her hazel eyes, the gentle curve of her mouth, the delicate arch of her eyebrows. In health, she was lovely in a quiet, dignified way that appealed to him far more than flashy beauty. Realizing he had been staring, Lucas cleared his throat. "Since you're feeling stronger, perhaps this is a good time for those proper introductions we mentioned." Rosalie nodded, withdrawing her hand and folding it with her other in her lap. "Yes, I would like that, though I feel at a disadvantage since you've seen me at my absolute worst while I know very little about you beyond your letters." "Fair point," Lucas conceded with a smile. "What would you like to know?" Thus began a conversation that lasted until Maria insisted Rosalie return to bed to rest. Lucas told her about his childhood in Missouri, his father's decision to move west after his mother's death, and the years of hard work that had transformed a small plot of land into a successful cattle ranch. Rosalie, in turn, shared stories of her life in Boston, her years in a girls' school after her parents died of influenza, her work as a teacher, and her decision to become a mail-order bride when the school closed due to financial troubles. "I had few prospects in Boston," she explained. "No family, dwindling savings, and a city full of widows and young women competing for too few eligible men. And yet, with your education and intelligence, you must have had options beyond marrying a stranger in Arizona territory," Lucas observed. Rosalie was silent for a moment, her eyes on the distant mountains visible through the window. "I wanted more than mere survival, Mr. Shaw. I wanted a real life, a home, perhaps children someday, and your letters, they spoke of partnership. That's not a word many men use when seeking a wife." Lucas remembered writing that word, choosing it carefully to express his hopes for marriage. "I meant it," he said quietly. "I have no interest in a woman who merely keeps house and bears children. Life out here requires more. It requires someone who thinks, who has courage and determination." "Like your mother?" Rosalie asked perceptively. Lucas nodded, surprised by her insight. "Yes, she was extraordinary. Father never recovered from losing her." He hesitated, then added, "When you fell ill, it brought back memories. She died of consumption, what the doctor feared you might have." Understanding dawned in Rosalie's eyes. "That's why you were so adamant about my care." "Partly," Lucas admitted. "And partly because," He trailed off, suddenly unsure how to express the connection he had felt toward this woman even before she regained consciousness. It seemed foolish, perhaps even inappropriate, because, Rosalie prompted gently, Lucas met her gaze directly. Because from the moment I saw you step off that stagecoach before you even collapsed, I felt responsible for you, not just as a duty, but as something I needed to do. The intensity of his words hung in the air between them. Rosalie's expression softened, and something new appeared in her eyes, a warmth that made Lucas's heart beat faster. I think, she said slowly, that we should perhaps begin using each other's given names. If we are to be married, Mr. Shaw and Miss Garrett seem overly formal. Lucas smiled, recognizing this for the significant step it was. I would like that, Rosalie. As would I, Lucas, she replied, his name sounding musical in her voice. Their eyes held for a long moment, until Maria's entrance with a tray of food broke the spell. But something had changed between them, a connection established that went beyond their written agreement. That night, as Lucas lay in his bed, he found himself thinking about the future with renewed hope. Rosalie was recovering, and in their conversation, he had glimpsed the intelligent, thoughtful woman he had imagined from her letters. But there was more to her than he had anticipated, a quiet strength that had enabled her to survive not only her recent illness, but also the hardships of her earlier life. For the first time since her arrival, Lucas allowed himself to truly consider what it would mean to have her as his wife. Not just the practical aspects, a well-run household, perhaps children someday, but the companionship, the partnership she had spoken of with such conviction. The thought filled him with a sense of anticipation he hadn't expected. The following week saw Rosalie's health improve steadily. She progressed from sitting by the window to short walks in the garden Maria had planted behind the house, leaning on Lucas's arm for support. These daily walks became a ritual they both looked forward to, a time for conversation without interruption. Lucas learned that Rosalie loved poetry and could recite Tennyson and Wordsworth from memory. She discovered his unexpected passion for astronomy, listening with interest as he pointed out constellations in the clear Arizona night sky. They discussed books they had both read, debated politics with surprising vigor, and gradually pieced together a picture of each other that went far beyond their letters. I never imagined a cattle rancher would have read Middlemarch, Rosalie remarked during one such walk, teasing him gently. And I never expected a Boston schoolteacher to have such strong opinions on Indian policy, Lucas countered with a smile. Rosalie's expression grew serious. The treatment of the native peoples is a moral failing of our nation. The stories I've heard since arriving here only confirm what I read in the East. Lucas nodded, admiring her conviction. You'll find many out here who disagree with you. The conflicts between settlers and Indians have left deep scars on both sides. And what do you think? She asked, watching his face carefully. Lucas was silent for a moment, considering. I think there's been wrong done on all sides, but the Indians have lost the most. Their way of life is disappearing. I've tried to maintain peaceful relations with the Apache in this region, fair trading, respecting their territorial boundaries. Not all ranchers do the same. Rosalie squeezed his arm approvingly. That's more than most would do. It's simple practicality, Lucas said, though her approval pleased him. I have no desire for conflict. I came here to build something, not to destroy. Is that why you chose ranching over mining? She asked. Clifton seems dominated by the copper mines. Lucas nodded. Mining tears up the earth, leaves scars that never heal. Ranching, done properly, works with the land rather than against it. He gestured toward the rolling hills surrounding them. This land sustains my cattle, and in return I try to be a good steward of it. Rosalie looked out at the landscape, seeing it perhaps through his eyes for the first time. It is beautiful in its own way, different from New England but no less magnificent. Do you miss it? Lucas asked. The East, she considered the question thoughtfully. I miss certain aspects, the libraries, the theaters, the changing seasons, but I'm finding things here to love as well. Her eyes met his briefly, then returned to the distant mountains. The openness, the sense of possibility, and the people have a directness I find refreshing. Even when that directness borders on rudeness? Lucas asked with a smile, thinking of some of the more colorful characters in Clifton. Rosalie laughed, the sound making Lucas's heart lighten. Even then, at least one knows where one stands. As they turned back toward the house, Lucas found himself wondering where they stood with each other. Their relationship had developed in an unconventional manner, letters followed by illness, with the normal courtship rituals bypassed entirely. Yet he felt closer to Rosalie after these 2 weeks than he had to anyone in years. The question of their marriage, however, remained unaddressed. The agreement stood, but Lucas was determined that Rosalie should have the opportunity to reconsider now that she had experienced the reality of life in Arizona territory. The thought of her choosing to return east filled him with dismay, but he would not hold her to a commitment made before she understood what she was agreeing to. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in spectacular hues of orange and purple, Lucas decided to broach the subject. "Rosalie," he began, his voice more hesitant than he intended, "I've been thinking about our arrangement." She turned to look at him, her expression suddenly guarded. "Oh, now that you've seen the ranch, experienced a little of life here, admittedly under difficult circumstances, I want to offer you the chance to reconsider." Rosalie's face paled slightly. "Are you having second thoughts, Lucas?" "No," he said quickly, dismayed by her misunderstanding. "Not at all. I merely thought you might be. This is very different from Boston, and your illness has shown how challenging life can be here with proper medical care so distant." Relief crossed her features, followed by a look of determination. "Lucas Shaw, if you think a bout of pneumonia is going to send me scurrying back east, you don't know me as well as you should by now." Despite the seriousness of the conversation, Lucas couldn't help smiling at her tone. "I'm beginning to realize that." "Good," she said firmly. "Because I made my choice when I boarded that stagecoach in Boston. I'm not in the habit of abandoning commitments simply because they prove difficult." Lucas studied her face in the fading light, struck by the quiet strength he saw there. "Even so, I want you to be sure. Marriage is meant to be permanent, and I wouldn't want you to feel trapped by a decision made without full knowledge." Rosalie's expression softened. "I appreciate your concern, truly. But these past weeks, difficult as they've been, have only confirmed what I hoped when I responded to your advertisement. You are a good man, Lucas Shaw, kind, intelligent, honorable. I would be proud to be your wife." Her words affected him more deeply than he had expected. In them, he heard not just acceptance of their arrangement, but genuine regard, perhaps even the beginnings of something more. "Then if you're certain," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "perhaps we should discuss the timing." "You'll need time to regain your strength fully, and 2 weeks," Rosalie interrupted. "Dr. Peterson says I should be fully recovered by then, and I see no reason to delay further." Lucas raised an eyebrow, amused by her decisiveness. 2 weeks it is, then. "I'll speak to Reverend Donnelly tomorrow." "Good," Rosalie said, satisfaction in her voice. Then, more softly, "I'm looking forward to beginning our life together properly, Lucas." "As am I," he replied, reaching over to take her hand. The simple gesture felt significant, a promise of the partnership they had both spoken of. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, hands joined, watching as stars appeared one by one in the vast Arizona sky. Lucas felt a contentment he hadn't experienced in years, perhaps ever. The future stretched before them, full of possibilities. There would be challenges. Certainly this harsh land ensured that, but facing them together seemed not just possible but right. The next 2 weeks passed quickly, filled with preparations for both the wedding and Rosalie's permanent place in the household. Lucas arranged for Reverend Donnelly to perform the ceremony at the ranch, wanting to spare Rosalie the journey into town and the inevitable curious stares of the townspeople. Rosalie, meanwhile, gradually assumed management of the household, working alongside Maria to learn the rhythms and requirements of ranch life. Her strength returned day by day, though the lingering cough worried Lucas more than he admitted. Dr. Peterson assured them both that it would fade with time, but advised Rosalie to avoid dust and cold air when possible, challenging prescriptions in Arizona territory. Word of the impending wedding spread through the area, bringing an unexpected stream of visitors to the ranch. Neighboring ranchers and their wives came bearing gifts and undisguised curiosity about Lucas Shaw's Eastern bride. Rosalie met them all with grace and quiet confidence, winning approval with her intelligence and evident affection for Lucas. The day before the wedding, a special visitor arrived, Emma Reynolds, the school teacher from Clifton and one of the few educated women in the area. She brought a beautiful handmade quilt as a wedding gift, but more importantly, offered Rosalie something invaluable: friendship. Teaching in Clifton can be isolating, Emma explained as she and Rosalie sat in the garden. The miners' wives are kind but have little time for socializing, and most of the ranchers' wives live too far away for regular visits. When I heard Lucas Shaw was bringing a bride from Boston, and an educated one at that, I hoped we might become friends. I would like that very much, Rosalie said sincerely, already warming to the forthright young woman. I've worried about the lack of intellectual companionship here. Emma laughed. Well, I can't promise the level of discourse you'd find in a Boston literary salon, but I do have a reasonable library you're welcome to share, and an insatiable curiosity about the world beyond Arizona territory. By the time Emma departed, the two women had made plans for regular visits and a possible reading circle that might include some of the more educated women from surrounding ranches. Lucas, observing their animated conversation from a distance, felt relieved. He had worried about Rosalie's isolation, knowing how different ranch life would be from her previous existence in Boston. That evening, their last before becoming husband and wife, Lucas and Rosalie sat on the porch as had become their custom. The air was cool, hinting at the approaching autumn, and Rosalie had wrapped herself in a shawl to ward off the chill. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Lucas asked, watching her profile in the fading light. Rosalie considered the question. "Not nervous exactly, perhaps anticipatory. It's a significant change, even though in some ways it feels as if we've already begun our life together." Lucas nodded, understanding what she meant. The unusual circumstances of her arrival had accelerated their relationship in some respects, while delaying it in others. They had shared the intimacy of her illness, had come to know each other's minds and values, yet had maintained a careful physical distance that would end with their vows. "I want you to know," he said slowly, choosing his words with care, "that I don't expect. That is, I understand you may need time to adjust to the idea of marriage in all its aspects." Rosalie turned to him, a slight smile on her lips. "Are you trying to tell me, in a very gentlemanly way, that you'll be patient regarding marital relations?" Lucas felt heat rise in his face, surprised by her directness. "Yes, I suppose I am. I appreciate your consideration," she said softly, "but I entered into this arrangement fully understanding what marriage entails. I may be from Boston, Lucas, but I'm not naive." "I never thought you were," he assured her quickly. "I just wanted you to know that I respect your feelings in the matter." Rosalie's expression grew thoughtful. "When I decided to become a mail-order bride, I knew I was agreeing to marry a stranger. I reconciled myself to the possibility that physical affection might develop slowly, if at all." She paused, then added more quietly, "But you are no longer a stranger to me, Lucas, and I find that I care for you more than I expected to." The simple admission stirred something deep within Lucas. "I care for you too, Rosalie. These weeks have shown me qualities in you that I admire greatly: your courage, your intelligence, your kindness. I feel fortunate that you chose to answer my advertisement." "As do I," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Whatever challenges lie ahead, I believe we will face them well together." In that moment, Lucas wanted nothing more than to kiss her, to bridge the remaining distance between them, but tomorrow would bring that opportunity and more. For tonight, it was enough to sit beside her, sharing the beauty of the Arizona night and the promise of a future together. The wedding day dawned clear and mild, a perfect late September morning. Lucas had spent the night in the bunkhouse at Rosalie's insistence. She was determined to maintain at least this one traditional aspect of their unconventional courtship. He returned to the main house early to oversee final preparations, finding Eduardo and the ranch hands already decorating the front yard with wildflowers and ribbons. Inside, Maria had transformed the parlor into a wedding chapel of sorts, with chairs borrowed from neighbors arranged in rows facing the fireplace where the ceremony would take place. The house smelled of fresh bread and roasting meat, evidence of the feast being prepared for the guests who would arrive later. Lucas retreated to his room to dress in the new suit he had ordered from Tucson for the occasion. As he struggled with the unfamiliar necktie, a knock came at his door. "Come in," he called, expecting Eduardo with some question about the preparations. Instead, Dr. Peterson entered, medical bag in hand. "Thought I'd check on the bride before the ceremony," he said, "and bring a wedding gift." He held out a small wooden box. Lucas took it curiously, opening the lid to find a silver pocket watch nestled on a bed of velvet. "Doc, this is too fine a gift," Peterson waved away his protest. "It was my father's. I have no children to pass it to, and I've grown fond of you over the years, Shaw. Consider it a thank you for all the times you've ridden through blizzards to fetch me for sick ranch hands." Touched, Lucas carefully closed the box. "I'll treasure it, and Rosalie will be glad to see you. She's been worried about that cough." "Let's go see her then," Peterson said, picking up his medical bag. "Can't have the bride collapsing at the altar, can we?" They found Rosalie in her room where Emma Reynolds was helping her dress. Lucas caught just a glimpse of white fabric before Emma shooed them away with exaggerated indignation. "It's bad luck for the groom to see the bride before the wedding," she insisted, closing the door firmly in their faces. Lucas and the doctor exchanged amused glances. "Superstitions seem to follow us everywhere, even out here," Peterson remarked as they retreated to the parlor. By 11 o'clock, guests had begun to arrive, neighboring ranchers and their families, shopkeepers from Clifton who had come to know Lucas over the years, even a few of the more respectable miners. Reverend Donnelly, a tall, thin man with a perpetual expression of mild surprise, took his place by the fireplace, prayer book in hand. Lucas stood beside him, trying not to fidget as the room filled. He had faced stampeding cattle and armed rustlers with less nervousness than he felt now, waiting for Rosalie to appear. Eduardo, serving as his best man, gave him an encouraging nod. Then a hush fell over the gathering. Lucas turned to see Rosalie standing in the doorway, and for a moment, he forgot to breathe. She wore a simple white dress with lace at the collar and cuffs, not an elaborate wedding gown, but elegant and perfectly suited to her slender frame. Her chestnut hair was arranged in a crown of braids, with tiny white flowers tucked among the strands. But it was her face that held Lucas transfixed, the quiet joy in her eyes, the soft curve of her lips, the delicate flush on her cheeks that spoke of health restored rather than fever. Emma, who was serving as maid of honor, guided Rosalie forward. As she reached Lucas, he impulsively extended his hand. She took it without hesitation, her fingers warm and steady in his. "You look beautiful," he whispered. "And you are very handsome," she returned, a hint of teasing in her voice as she straightened his slightly crooked necktie with her free hand. Reverend Donnelly cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to the ceremony. The service was brief but meaningful, the traditional vows spoken clearly by both. When Lucas placed the simple gold ring on Rosalie's finger, he was struck by how right it looked there, as if it had always belonged. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Donnelly declared. "Mr. Shaw, you may kiss your bride." Lucas hesitated for just a moment, aware of the many eyes upon them. Then Rosalie tilted her face up to his, a question and an invitation in her eyes. He lowered his head and pressed his lips gently to hers in a kiss that was brief but full of promise. The guests burst into applause, and someone, likely one of the miners, let out a whoop of approval. Rosalie laughed, the sound making Lucas's heart swell with happiness. Hand in hand, they turned to face their neighbors and friends as husband and wife. The celebration that followed was joyous and informal. Tables had been set up in the yard, laden with food prepared by Maria and the wives of neighboring ranchers. A fiddler from Clifton provided music, and soon dancing began on a wooden platform Eduardo and the ranch hands had constructed for the occasion. Lucas found himself constantly aware of Rosalie throughout the festivities, her laugh as she conversed with guests, the graceful way she moved among the tables ensuring everyone had enough to eat, the warmth in her eyes when she looked his way. His wife. The thought filled him with wonder and gratitude. As evening approached, the party showed no signs of ending. Lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the gathering. Lucas noticed Rosalie speaking with Dr. Peterson, their conversation appearing serious. Concerned, he made his way to her side. "Is everything all right?" he asked, placing a hand lightly on her back. Rosalie turned to him with a reassuring smile. "Yes, just getting some advice from the doctor about strengthening my lungs. He's recommended daily walks and some breathing exercises." Peterson nodded. "Mrs. Shaw's recovery is progressing well, but we want to prevent any recurrence, especially as winter approaches." "Mrs. Shaw," Rosalie repeated softly as if testing the name. "I'm still getting used to that." "It suits you," Lucas told her, unable to keep the pride from his voice. Peterson excused himself to get more food, leaving the newlyweds alone for the first time since the ceremony. "Are you enjoying the celebration?" Lucas asked, suddenly aware of a strange shyness between them. "Very much," Rosalie assured him. "Everyone has been so welcoming. I hadn't expected such warmth from people who barely know me." "They know you're important to me," Lucas said simply. "That's enough for most folks around here." Rosalie's expression softened. "And am I important to you, I mean?" Lucas took her hand, running his thumb over the new ring on her finger. "More than I can properly express. These past weeks, getting to know you, seeing your strength during your illness, talking with you each evening, I've come to care for you deeply, Rosalie." "I feel the same," she admitted, a touch of wonder in her voice. "When I left Boston, I hoped for companionship, mutual respect perhaps. I never expected to find someone who would understand me as you seem to." Lucas wanted to say more, to tell her that what he felt had already grown beyond mere caring, that he believed he was falling in love with her. But surrounded by their guests, this didn't seem the right moment for such a confession. Instead, he asked, "Would you care to dance with your husband, Mrs. Shaw?" Rosalie's eyes lit up. "I would be delighted, Mr. Shaw." He led her to the dancing platform where several couples were already moving to the fiddle's lively tune. As he took her in his arms, maintaining a proper distance for a public dance, Lucas was acutely aware of her nearness, the subtle scent of lavender that clung to her hair, the warmth of her hand in his, the graceful way she followed his lead despite his somewhat unpracticed steps. "I should warn you that dancing isn't among my accomplishments," he told her as they moved around the platform. "Cattle don't require much waltzing." Rosalie laughed, the sound making his heart lighten. "You're doing admirably. And I'm hardly in a position to critique, given my recent inability to stand upright without assistance." "Yet here you are, dancing at your own wedding," Lucas said admiringly. "You've made a remarkable recovery." "I had excellent care," she replied, her eyes meeting his with warmth that made his breath catch. They danced until Rosalie began to tire, her steps slowing and her breathing becoming more labored. Concerned, Lucas immediately guided her from the platform to a quiet corner of the yard where chairs had been set up. "I've overexerted you," he said worriedly, noting the flush in her cheeks. "Dr. Peterson would have my hide." Rosalie shook her head, smiling despite her obvious fatigue. "I'm fine, truly, just need to catch my breath." She glanced at the continuing festivities. "Though I will admit, I wouldn't mind if our guests began to think about departing soon." Lucas understood her meaning at once. Despite the genuine enjoyment of the celebration, they were both eager for a quieter moment, for the beginning of their private life together. "I believe I can arrange that," he said, squeezing her hand gently before moving away to speak with Eduardo. Within the hour, guests began making their farewells, offering final congratulations and good wishes to the newlyweds. Emma was among the last to leave, embracing Rosalie warmly and promising to visit the following week. Finally, only the household staff remained, and they tactfully withdrew to their own quarters, leaving Lucas and Rosalie alone in the main house for the first time as husband and wife. A moment of awkward silence fell between them as they stood in the parlor, the remnants of the wedding decorations around them. Then Rosalie smiled, breaking the tension. "Well, Mr. Shaw, I believe we've successfully hosted our first social gathering as a married couple." Lucas returned her smile, grateful for her ability to ease the moment. "Indeed, Mrs. Shaw, though I hope future events will be somewhat less momentous. I don't think I could manage another day like this one anytime soon." "Nor I," Rosalie admitted, reaching up to remove a flower from her hair. "Though it was a lovely day, I'll remember it always." Lucas moved closer, gently taking the flower from her fingers. "Let me help you with these," he offered, carefully removing another blossom from the intricate arrangement of braids. Rosalie stood still, her eyes on his face as he worked, his fingers occasionally brushing against her hair or the sensitive skin of her neck. The simple task took on an unexpected intimacy that made Lucas's heart beat faster. When the last flower was removed, Rosalie reached up to loosen her hair, but Lucas caught her hands. "May I?" he asked softly. She nodded, her eyes never leaving his. With careful movements, Lucas began to unpin the braids, watching as the chestnut strands fell loose around her shoulders. The simple act felt profoundly meaningful, a symbol of the new intimacy they now shared. "Your hair is beautiful," he said, running his fingers through the freed waves. "I've wanted to do this since the first time I saw it down during your illness." "I remember moments," Rosalie admitted. "Your hands on my face, in my hair, I thought I was dreaming." Lucas cupped her face gently. "Not dreams. I couldn't seem to stop touching you even then, especially when the fever was at its worst and I feared." He couldn't complete the sentence, the memory of those desperate hours still too fresh. "But I recovered," Rosalie reminded him, covering his hand with her own. "Thanks to you, thanks to your own strength," Lucas corrected. "I've never seen such determination." Rosalie smiled. "Perhaps we both played a part." The air between them seemed charged with possibility. Lucas knew he could kiss her now, should kiss her, as her husband, but he hesitated, wanting her to be certain. As if reading his thoughts, Rosalie stepped closer. "Lucas," she said softly, "we've done everything in an unconventional order, you and I. Known illness before health, partnership before passion, but I find I don't regret a moment of it. It's brought us here together." "Together," Lucas repeated, drawing her into his arms. "That's all I want, Rosalie, to build a life with you day by day. Beginning tonight," she whispered, lifting her face to his. This time, when their lips met, there was no audience to restrain them. The kiss deepened, tentative at first, then with growing confidence as they learned each other in this new way. Lucas felt Rosalie's arms encircle his neck, her body pressing closer to his, and he tightened his embrace, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Rosalie's eyes were bright with emotion. "I believe," she said, a hint of shyness in her voice, "that we should continue this conversation somewhere more private." Lucas nodded, suddenly nervous despite his desire. "If you're certain." "If you need more time," Rosalie silenced him with another brief kiss. "I'm certain, Lucas. I want to be your wife in every sense." With those words, the last of his hesitation vanished. Lucas swept her into his arms, her surprised laugh warming his heart as he carried her down the hallway to what was now their shared bedroom. Later, in the quiet darkness of their room, Rosalie lay with her head on Lucas's chest, his arm around her shoulders holding her close. Outside, the night was alive with the sounds of the Arizona wilderness, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of wind through cottonwood leaves, the occasional lowing of cattle from the nearby pasture. "Are you happy?" Lucas asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. Rosalie propped herself up to look at him, her hair falling in a curtain around them. In the moonlight streaming through the window, her face was luminous with contentment. "Happier than I ever expected to be," she said honestly. "When I boarded that stagecoach in Boston, I hoped for security, companionship, the chance to build a worthwhile life I never imagined I would find." She paused, searching for the right word. Love, Lucas suggested, his heart suddenly pounding. Rosalie's eyes widened slightly, then softened. Yes, she whispered. Love. Lucas pulled her down for a gentle kiss. I love you, Rosalie Shaw. I think I began falling in love with you when I read your first letter with its clear-eyed honesty and quiet dignity, and every day since you arrived has only deepened that feeling. Even when I was delirious with fever, she asked, a touch of humor in her voice. Especially then, Lucas said seriously. Watching your struggle, your courage even in illness, how could I not love you? Rosalie laid her head on his chest again, her arm tightening around him. I love you too, Lucas. It happened so gradually that I hardly noticed until it was already an established fact, but I think I knew for certain the day you asked if I wanted to reconsider our arrangement, when you nearly bit my head off for suggesting it. Lucas teased, remembering her indignant response. She laughed softly. Yes, because the thought of leaving, of not becoming your wife, made me realize how deeply I had come to care for you. They fell silent, content in their newfound understanding. Lucas felt a sense of completion he had never experienced before, as if a part of himself he hadn't known was missing had finally been found. What do you think the future holds for us? Rosalie asked eventually, her voice drowsy with approaching sleep. Lucas considered the question, his hand still moving gently over her skin. Growth, he said finally. The ranch expanding, perhaps children someday, but mostly I see us growing together, learning, building, facing whatever comes side by side. I like that vision, Rosalie murmured. Especially the children part. Lucas pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Sleep now, love. Tomorrow is the first day of that future. As Rosalie's breathing deepened into sleep, Lucas remained awake a while longer, marveling at the unexpected turn his life had taken. He had advertised for a practical partnership, a marriage based on mutual benefit and respect. Instead, he had found love with this remarkable woman who had traveled across a continent and fought through illness to reach him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and in this harsh, beautiful land, there would surely be many. Lucas felt certain they would face them together, stronger for the unusual beginning of their union. With that comforting thought, he finally allowed sleep to claim him, his wife secure in his arms. The early years of their marriage brought both joys and challenges. Rosalie adapted to ranch life with determination and good humor, learning to ride, to cook on a temperamental wood stove, and to manage a household far different from anything she had known in Boston. Lucas found in her not just a loving wife, but a true partner, someone whose intelligence and education complemented his practical knowledge in ways that benefited them both. The winter following their wedding proved difficult. Rosalie's lungs, still weakened from her illness, struggled with the cold, dry air. Several times she developed coughs that left Lucas watching anxiously through the night, remembering those first desperate days of her arrival. But with Dr. Peterson's care and Lucas's vigilance, she avoided any serious recurrence of pneumonia. By spring, Rosalie's health had improved significantly. She began riding out with Lucas occasionally, exploring the beauty of the land that was now her home. During one such ride in late April, they stopped to rest by a stream where wildflowers carpeted the banks in brilliant purple and gold. I have news, Rosalie said as they sat side by side watching the clear water flow over smooth stones. Dr. Peterson confirmed it yesterday. Lucas turned to her, noting the mixture of excitement and nervousness in her expression. News, she took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. We're going to have a child, Lucas, in November. For a moment, Lucas couldn't speak, overwhelmed by emotion. Then he gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, which to him she was. A child, he repeated, his voice rough with feeling. Our child. Rosalie nodded against his shoulder, and he felt the dampness of her tears. Are you happy? She asked, echoing the question he had asked her on their wedding night. Lucas drew back to look at her, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Happier than I have words to express. Are you? I know it's sooner than we planned, and with your health I'm thrilled, Rosalie assured him. Doctor Peterson says I'm much stronger now, and many women find that pregnancy actually improves their overall health. Besides, she added with a smile, this child will be born in November after the worst heat has passed but before winter sets in. Perfect timing, I think. Lucas laughed, amazed as always by her practical optimism. Trust you to find the strategic advantage in the timing. The months of Rosalie's pregnancy passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Lucas threw himself into expanding and improving the ranch house, determined that their child would grow up in a home worthy of the Shaw name. He added 2 bedrooms, expanded the kitchen to Maria's delight, and built a covered porch that wrapped around 3 sides of the house, providing shade and outdoor living space through the hot summer months. Rosalie, meanwhile, transformed one of the new bedrooms into a nursery, sewing curtains and quilts while corresponding extensively with Emma about educational theories and childhood development. She also began a serious study of local medicinal plants, working with Maria to expand the herb garden behind the house. I don't want to rely solely on Dr. Peterson for every minor illness, she explained to Lucas. Not when we live so far from town. Traditional remedies have value, especially for a child. Lucas supported her efforts, recognizing the blend of Eastern education and Western practicality that typified his wife's approach to challenges. This balance of perspectives had already benefited the ranch in numerous ways, from improved accounting methods to innovative approaches to water conservation. As Rosalie's pregnancy progressed, Lucas found himself watching her with increasing amazement and concern. Her body changed, growing round with their child, yet she maintained her energy and spirits despite the summer heat that many pregnant women found unbearable. Only in the evenings would she admit to fatigue, allowing Lucas to massage her swollen feet while they sat on the new porch, watching the sunset and discussing names for their child. "If it's a boy," Rosalie said one such evening in late September, "I'd like to name him after your father." William is a good, strong name. Lucas was touched by the suggestion. And if it's a girl, Rosalie was silent for a moment, her hands resting on her prominent belly. "What about Sarah, after my sister?" Lucas looked at her in surprise. "I didn't know you had a sister." "She died when we were children, before our parents," Rosalie explained softly. "Scarlet fever, I was 7, she was 5. I've never spoken much about her, but I've been thinking of her often lately." She smiled sadly. "She would have been a wonderful aunt." Lucas covered her hands with his own. "Sarah is a beautiful name. Sarah Shaw, it has a nice sound to it." On a cool November morning, with the mountains dusted with the first snow of the season, Sarah Maria Shaw made her entrance into the world after a labor that left Lucas pacing the yard for hours, alternately praying and cursing as Rosalie's cries reached him through the open window. Dr. Peterson had arrived just in time, assisted by Maria and Emma, who had traveled from Clifton the moment she received word that Rosalie's time was near. When the doctor finally emerged to tell him he had a healthy daughter, Lucas nearly collapsed with relief. "And Rosalie?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Exhausted but well," Peterson assured him. "She's asking for you." Lucas entered the bedroom cautiously, overwhelmed by the significance of the moment. Rosalie lay propped against pillows, her face pale but radiant as she cradled a small bundle wrapped in the quilt Emma had given them as a wedding present. She looked up as Lucas approached, her smile weary but triumphant. "Come meet your daughter, Lucas," she said softly. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, peering down at the tiny face nestled against Rosalie's breast. The baby had a dusting of dark hair and skin still flushed from the ordeal of birth. As Lucas watched, she opened her eyes dark blue, as all newborns are, but with a focus that seemed to look right through him. "She's perfect," he whispered, reaching out to touch one tiny hand. Immediately, the baby's fingers closed around his, a grip surprisingly strong for one so small. "Hello, Sarah. Would you like to hold her?" Rosalie asked. Lucas nodded, though he felt suddenly nervous. Rosalie carefully transferred the bundled infant into his arms, showing him how to support her head. The feeling of his daughter's warm weight against his chest unleashed emotions Lucas hadn't known he possessed: fierce protectiveness, overwhelming love, and a humbling sense of responsibility. "I'll keep you safe," he promised the child in a whisper. "Both of you, always." Rosalie reached out to touch his arm, understanding in her eyes. "I know you will. We're so lucky, Lucas, to have found each other, to have her, to have built this life together." Lucas could only nod, too moved for words. The journey that had begun with a desperate letter to a mail-order bride agency had led here, to this perfect moment of family, of belonging. Whatever the future held, they would face it together, Lucas, Rosalie, and now little Sarah Shaw. The years that followed brought changes, growth, and occasional hardships. The ranch prospered under Lucas and Rosalie's joint management, gradually expanding into one of the largest operations in eastern Arizona territory. Sarah grew into a lively child with her mother's intelligence and her father's love of the land. When she was 3, a brother joined the family, William Eduardo Shaw, named for both Lucas's father and the loyal foreman who had become like family. Through it all, Lucas and Rosalie's partnership deepened, their love strengthening with each challenge overcome, each joy shared. Rosalie's health remained somewhat delicate, particularly in winter, but her determined spirit never faltered. She established a small school on the ranch for their children and those of the workers, bringing education to an area where it had been scarce. Lucas, with her encouragement, took on leadership roles in the community, working to improve relations between ranchers, miners, and the Apache. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Lucas and Rosalie stood on the porch of their home, now a substantial house with glass windows, proper furniture, and even a small library filled with books ordered from back east. Behind them, the sounds of a celebration drifted from the yard where friends, neighbors, and workers had gathered to mark the occasion. "Did you ever imagine this?" Lucas asked, his arm around Rosalie's waist, "when you stepped off that stage coach all those years ago?" Rosalie leaned her head against his shoulder, her gaze taking in the prosperous ranch, the playing children, the community they had helped build. "Not in my wildest dreams," she admitted. "I hoped for security, for purpose. I never dared hope for such happiness." Lucas pressed a kiss to her temple, still marveling at the twist of fate that had brought this extraordinary woman into his life. "Do you remember what the stagecoach driver said when I asked how long you'd been ill? Didn't complain none, he told me. That was my first clue to your character." Rosalie laughed softly. "And my first clue to yours was waking to find you bathing my face with cool water, hour after hour. A man willing to nurse a stranger through fever rather than abandoning her to hired care that told me everything I needed to know about Lucas Shaw." "Not everything," Lucas teased, turning her in his arms. "I've tried to show you something new every day since." "And succeeded," Rosalie assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "I love you, Lucas Shaw, more with each passing year." "And I love you, Rosalie Shaw," he replied, his voice deep with emotion. "My partner, my heart, my home." Behind them, Sarah called for their attention, eager to begin the anniversary dance Eduardo had organized. Hand in hand, Lucas and Rosalie turned to rejoin their guests, their family, their community. The journey that had begun with illness and uncertainty had led to a life richer and more fulfilling than either could have imagined, a true partnership forged in the crucible of that first desperate night, when a mail-order bride arrived with fever, and a cowboy nursed her through the darkness into dawn.